Hello, my name is Roy Poyan, and I'm the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Fentanyl and the Family in Harm's Way. We want to take a look at today the roles and responsibilities that sit inside of a plan of action. And we're aware that this is kind of getting into the weeds and the minutia of the idea of, okay, we've got a plan, well, let's just go out and do it. Well, we already discussed why that may not be the best approach, because typically you're going to be dealing with a sundry of different things. And to make sure that you get them all done the way you had thought you would, a plan written down is a great way to approach. Plus, it takes a lot of stress off of you. You can always come back to the plan. The same is true for roles and responsibilities. They're written down. They're oriented towards the goal of the plan. Now, what we do is we sit there when we say a plan, we have a goal. Let's say the goal is that Dad connects with a counselor for dealing with his enabling that is determined to be in denial. So the solution was to get a counselor. The decision was find a counselor that was in network, and the plan is now to act on that decision. So now you're going and you're getting in touch with the HMO, you're taking time to interview counselors and determine which is the best suited one for what you're trying to accomplish in your plan. So you have a goal, and then you have objectives, and then the objectives, let's say there's 2 or 3 objectives. Find out who's in network, find out what it's going to cost out of pocket, and what the length of typical treatment for this particular type of counseling would be, and then determine which is the best counselor for you. So those are 3 objectives. Now there might be a task for each one of those objectives. And can you see how we're building kind of a, boy, if we did it this way, it would be very thorough. And actually anybody can help because it's in writing, and that's a very light, touch type example that I just gave. Some examples are much more complex, where the goal requires somebody to take responsibility for it, and then the objectives build towards meeting the goal, and they usually are timelined. So the objective might start at this time, and by September we'd like to have this done. And then the tasks that take place to achieve the objective. So we're really organizing yourself, and you might say, well, you're organizing us like we're a military unit or a corporation. And my response to that would be, yeah, primarily because they got it right. This is exactly how you do this kind of work. The fact that you're an individual, you are kind of an army unit, you are kind of a corporation. You run finances, you run operations in your life, and you're responsible for people that work around you or live around you. So why not use those kind of techniques if they've been proven over centuries to have been valuable in achieving the results and being able to make sure that your T's are crossed or your I's are dotted. So let's go to the family table and review exactly how we do roles and responsibilities when we're trying to accomplish our plan, which was number 3 of our 3D coping skills that we used when we looked at the different impacts that an issue is taking place in regards to our family. I just walked you back through the process. Thank you very much. Let's move on over to the table now.
Thank you again for joining us here at the family table. This gives us an opportunity to open up some of the topics that we had talked about in regards to the different responsibilities and roles inside of a family plan of action. Sometimes this gets kind of mundane or boring, so if this is not the topic for you, change the channel. But I wouldn't encourage that, because there are some very important messages inside of today's episode that I think are real pearls of understanding for us to expose, and for you to then challenge yourself to see if maybe some of these are real in your family and in your family dynamic. So let's get started. Let's open up our study guides by the episode and the issue regarding roles and responsibilities. And in doing so, we're going to find ourselves looking at the importance of talking about what's going on. You might say, Roy, we're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities. In order to do that, you first have to understand what it is you're going to be assigning as roles and responsibilities. So we need to take a look at what is the topic. And if we're doing that, then aren't we really talking about communication? So when we talk about assigning roles and responsibilities, we're saying that somebody is going to be kind of transparently accountable for doing something. Remember, this fits inside the elements of a plan of action, which we identified as a goal with maybe 3 objectives. Doesn't have to be 3, it might be 1. And then underneath that objective, which helps you to achieve the goal, would be some tasks. Well, the tasks are only going to get done if they're assigned to somebody. And that's what roles and responsibilities are. They're assignments of tasks that help the families to achieve an objective, which helps them to meet a goal that sits inside of their action plan. What are some of the barriers that might happen? Well, negativism could actually arise. Go figure. It's a family. It's a dynamic. It could be work. It's a dynamic. Wherever you have a dynamic, there is the potential for the communication and its effectiveness to be either cooled down or adjusted or manipulated into something that it wasn't intended to be. And negativism is one of those methodologies used by us, sometimes unknowingly. We may think that we're just presenting our side of the story, but really we're destroying the communication and the advancement of moving forward and creating a good, strong plan of action. Parental inconsistency or an inconsistency of the family members, that could create a problem. Remember, we're looking at what types of things get in our way when we're looking at assigning roles and responsibilities. Denial. I don't think we need to be doing this. Well, that doesn't exactly help, but it does present itself, and it needs to be addressed if brought up. Otherwise, assigning the roles and responsibilities to somebody that's in denial and they're outwardly saying that they are, you pretty much know that role probably isn't going to be fulfilled as well as it might be. So with that in mind, you need to see it for what it is. A miscarried expression of anger. Well, that could be that I'm being asked to do something, for this objective that I really don't think I have the skills for. So that misplaced anger may actually be real, and we need to pay attention to that and to hear what this person has to say. But if they're saying, I don't think we should be doing this, and here's why, then you need to back up and start to take a look at, is this the right objective for us? Because maybe they're correct. But once you've determined that, then maybe the role and responsibility needs to be assigned to somebody else. So there is also unrealistic expectations in a role and a responsibility. And we want to avoid that, Let's keep it real. Simple is definitely better. Although when you look at doing this plan of action, you're probably saying, Roy, there's nothing simple about this. I wish there could be. I wish that this was just a normal way that we got things accomplished, because they would be done so much in line with the proper way of addressing an issue, the proper way of determining a solution, the proper way of making a decision, and the proper way of designing a plan of action. And when it is a plan of action, how do we do that? And that's what we talked about in the elements of the action, and now the roles and responsibilities. So what are some of the main things, if we were to sit there and say, we've studied this assignment of roles and responsibilities? Oh, trust me, in organizational behavior psychology, industrial psychology, they have studied this extensively. There is a thing called triangulation. Triangulation is something that occurs a lot in families, especially with substance use disorders. And here's what I'd like you to think of it as. It's kind of like a triangle, okay? Triangle. And with that in mind, this may be the relationship of the mother to the father. Boom, okay? And this may be the one that's abusing substances right here. So what ends up happening in triangulation is these two get along and eliminate this one. And that's a strategy that is done. And it's not always done on purpose, but it's extremely disruptive when you're trying to create a plan and trying to get people to kind of work together towards an objective. Because what ends up happening is they pit one against the other. Let's take a look at this, because I can almost assure you, if it isn't happening right now, it probably will later on, and maybe it's happening and it's just not so obvious. So what are the areas inside the internal, for a stronger support element in the family that are disruptive? Well, in triangulation, we see that communication is thwarted and in a very manipulative way. It's distorted. So you want to try and increase your awareness of the quality of how well you're communicating if you believe that triangulation is taking place. You want encouragement. You want to openly encourage people that this is what we're trying to do, and we appreciate all your work in this, and how can we help you? If you're going to be going down to the local city to talk to them about turning the electricity on, do you need our past bills? I can help you find them. We have them up in the drawer in the credenza. Now, expressing appreciation is really important in these kind of relationships, because triangulation tends to work off of the negative. It's kind of like they create a bond, a sister and brother against another sister, where the three might be able to communicate effectively and get along with each other, because those two have created this mutual objective or interest, special interest, and they've left the other one out. They kind of work against that other one in a defensive way. So letting people know that you appreciate that, it helps them to kind of take a step back, as though they are saying to themselves, why are you appreciating when we're really kind of like excluding you? And they start to self-examine. So it is very effective. Social connectedness is in an area of kind of like exposure. So if you have a triangulation and you're in the home and they're doing this in the relationships, that's one thing. But if you're down at the community center and that's happening, they feel a little bit more exposed. So let's take an example of how this would look. When we're looking at taking a family dynamic and it's in the house, and we remove it and put it in the community, the family dynamic is more conscious of what it's doing. And so triangulation in the home would be one thing, but triangulation out in the community or a party where other people are noticing it becomes a little bit more awkward. So when we're starting to take a look at where we are when this is happening, we do have more available to us when we start to shift around in our environment. I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, but when you're experiencing this type of personalities and kind of like, it's not conspiratorial, but in a sense it is manipulative, because typically it's being done as a defensive. It might be that an example would include, I don't want my mother to prohibit me from using the car, and she has legitimate concerns for doing that. That's one of her boundaries. And now all of a sudden, I'm enlisting my sister in kind of a triangulation to support me so that we can both go against my mother's boundary of me using the car, where the sister starts to come in other conversations separate from theirs and say, regarding Jack, I think it's okay Mom, if you let him use the car once in a while, and he goes only a short distance. So, that's kind of an example of what we would see. Now, when we're looking at other types of triangulations, it's going to be something that you and your family therapist can identify, because it's going to be based on an individual situation. And that way, you are more, because you've taken this episode, cognitive and aware of the fact that this is taking place. And it may seem like we got off the trail of roles and responsibilities, but when you think about it, if we're assigning responsibilities out, if I'm doing one thing and Barbara's doing another, could a triangulation be a positive? I think it would be called something different, honestly, Because if you're sitting there saying, hey, I've got responsibilities for finding out how insurance is going to be paid, and Barbara, the other sister, has experience working in a real estate company, and she's more used to talking on legal terms and financial, I'd like to kind of get some of her help. That's not triangulation, that's just working together. And then they're sharing kind of roles and responsibilities. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So building internal support is one of the things that the study guide gives you space in order to write down. But it has to do with being aware of communication between family members, encouraging, what can you do, expressing appreciation. So you're actually going to, in the study guide, write these things down related to your individual family dynamic so that it makes sense to you and that you're including it as part of your response on purpose, which basically takes us from these learning lessons in the study guide and leads us into the workbook. And as we've done before, many times by now, we're going to take the workbook and open it up to the area of roles and responsibilities, and we're going to turn it to the page, and you're going to start to see some of the practical exercises that are involved here. And I'll just kind of glance through those with you as you would see them as you're going through this particular section in the 32 learning issues. The first practical exercise has the family plan of action, roles and responsibilities, and in that you're more or less assigning, who's responsible for what and the responsibility description, okay? Then you would go to the other page and you would start to identify what resources are required. Well, that's good. If you're going to assign a role or responsibility and they're going to need maybe some funding because they have to travel overnight for something, which is pretty exaggerated, but let's say they needed money, then somebody has to decide, who's going to give this person money to go and do what is that, or they need a car, or they need maybe a financial statement of the family in order to take it down to qualify for some free benefits that would be offered. You have to kind of prove out that you cannot afford it before they'll give it to you. All kinds of scenarios will present themselves such as that. So in terms of the steps and then the budget needed and then the timeline, these are typical to design a plan of action, which we've seen in the 3D coping skills. But then when we start to take a look at what about triangulation inside of a nuclear family, not a regular, but a nuclear family. We want to take a look at when the parents disagree, okay? How often do you feel caught up in the middle? Well, if you're feeling that way, then that's a triangulation. I mean, when the mom says, I don't think we should tell anybody that this is going on with, Jack, and the dad says, we need to not worry about that. We need to worry about how are we going to get through this, and what are the action steps that we need to take. And then, they're kind of like saying to you, the other person in the family, not the one that's misusing, who do you agree with more? In a way, they may not be saying it exactly, but they are kind of looking to the third person saying, who do you side with? Well, they're creating a triangulation, and that's unfortunate because it shouldn't take place. And you can call them on that now that you've taken this seminar. How does your mother butt in to disagreements, okay? I'm using mother, it's just, one of the family members. It could be between a sister and two brothers. It doesn't have to be a parent. But these examples are that. Does your father share secrets with you that he doesn't share with his mother? Okay, with your mother. Well, that's a problem, that should not be taking place because that creates kind of like this is just between you and me, okay? That's not healthy. And then parents that try to involve you in their fights and problems. Do you ever feel that the father would rather spend time with you rather than the mother? That when one person says, I'd rather spend more time with you than the third person, that's where triangulation is pretty obvious. So we're bringing this forward to you because we see it a lot, okay? And trust me, we wouldn't be bringing it forward at all. I mean, there's a slew of conditions and behaviors that you could go through regarding families and personalities and communication and likes and dislikes, but we're not going to take you there. We're just trying to give you the meat and potatoes of these kind of things happen a lot in a family that's dealing with substance use disorder. It becomes a part of the family dynamic. And then somebody might say, well, okay, what's the fallout? This is one of the big fallouts, is triangulation. So I don't think you need to go throwing that term around, as though, well, I know something you don't. But if you take a look at these 21 different suggestions of what you might see, you're going to have a really good understanding of where this is going and where it's likely to take you, because it makes it a lot more difficult if you don't address it and it stays alive. Now, these become issues, okay? And we all know that when we have an issue, it more than likely needs to be solved. And at the end of this episode, you'll have an opportunity to break down an issue that you've identified with your work in the seminar workbook on these practical exercises. Don't just leave it there. Create a solution, define it, okay? Determine a solution, develop a decision, and design a plan of action. Use your 3Ds on what you did as your practical exercise work as it related to what you learned about assigning roles and responsibilities. Now, it goes without saying that roles and responsibilities should be clearly stated. They should be stated in terms that are achievable. Timelines should be realistic. Resources needed to accomplish it should be provided, or arrangements to be provided. All of these things need to be kind of considered as, well, of course we would do that. Well, yeah, I understand. And that's why I said, if you want to turn the channel, go ahead. Some of this is pretty obvious. But the fact is, it may not be obvious, or some of it may not be. Bet you didn't know an awful lot about triangulation before you started this. But you can, I'm sure, see by now that this is an important factor for you to take a look at. It's very coercive, okay? It erodes the communication and the ability of the family to have strong bonds and effective relationships. I want to thank you for the journey that you're taking, because you're taking it in such a way that you're trying to learn more about what others have already studied and would like for you to know. All of this material, once again, comes from the NIH, SAMHSA, their ASAB, psychology in terms of papers that are written, studies that are done, empirically proven studies in many cases, and best practices that are used on a regular basis throughout this industry in the area of recovery psychology and medicine. They're just boiled down into issues that you can grasp a hold of, and that's what we're looking to achieve. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved, and then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen. The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like? The third question. What will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the 5th category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these 3 questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is, and now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your fifth sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine, what are our values? Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decisions you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number 1 factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut because that's often where, you know, our faith comes in and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. You know, is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then would you do this if, would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry. On all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made based on the solution that you know you want to use are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action, and we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.